Hi class, as we begin Module 3, you're going to be reading a great deal more in your text, and you're going to find that the text is easy to read, but will do a much better job on the theories and going into detail than I will do in this video for you. I'm only going to touch on the top pieces of it. So, it's an interesting title for this chapter, Sociology, and Sociology of Gender. So what's the sociology? Well, sociology is everywhere. So I think that as you start to explore this, you're going to see how society guides so much of what we think and how we come into place. So our text says there's 3 reasons to learn gender theory. We all have our own theory gender, which allows us the opportunity to test our theories versus those who have been studying it at a deeper level. The second reason that it is important is to test the explanations, the explanatory ways of understanding gender. Learning theory forces one to consider serious strengths and weaknesses to our own thought. And the third reason is it's important is to test whether it really works, and can you see the bias that is in almost all situations and the stereotypes that we can see. Now, as we enter this, I think of a student in my social problems class, and in my social problems class they have to write a position paper. This was a few years ago, and she wrote her positions paper saying that the American educational system is too liberal and especially attacked feminists in the process, that women did not deserve equal rights, or should they have equal rights, that this was a wrong teaching of the liberal institution. I was disappointed, but respected her position because she was able to argue it based on her beliefs within theory, that men had more power, that they were physically stronger, they deserved more than women in the process. And she did not believe that women should be paid equally. And she could fight for her position. Theory allows us to do that. It really allows us to explore at different levels, determine why we believe the way we do. Her position even said that within that process, because women were not equal to men, that they should not be valued in the same way, nor was it wrong to come into place with even some abuse issues. Think about it. How far have we come in that process? Part of this chapter will be looking at the feminist movement. And it's important that you understand how that has varied over time. Now, for many women in this class, as well as men, they'll say, I can't be a feminist. But feminism is often misrepresented as this radical feminism. The theory itself looks for us to look at women in the same way that we look at men. Instead of assuming that the male look is the right look, it has us look at both men and women, that there is equality in the process. So, when we talk about feminism, you need to be careful to know that we're talking about an equal treatment of both sexes and how they fit into society. We're not talking about that radical feminism that you'll review in this chapter. So let's take a quick look at the PowerPoints, because I'm going to leave most of this for the videos and for your reading, because, as I said, she does an excellent job as she presents this. Now, in most modules, I change the chapters or the textbooks, PowerPoints. I add to them, I take away from them to cover our issues. For this chapter and the next chapter, I'm going to use them in entirety to give you a summary of the chapter to help you move through the process so that you'll have them basically as an outline of what you're reading to come back to. So, as we look at the wave of feminism, it's interesting as we look at these biases that come into place. So the first point is the role of theory. What is the role of theory? It is central to all of sociology. In intro, we talk about 3 theories. We talk about structural functional, we talk about conflict, and we talk about social, we talk about interactionist, social interactionist theory. Those are our 3 main theories that we look at both in intro and in social problems. In family, we look at all sorts of theories that come into place. We look at the conflict theory very strongly, but we also look at social exchange. We look at the theories of social psych, which are both sociology and psychology theories that come together to look at the individual. We look at things like the looking glass theory on how we form ourselves, how we see ourselves based on society. We look at Mead as well, and Mead looks at the I and how we form that in symbolic interactionists. We look at how symbols define us. So theory is pretty broad. People often have working theories about gender. Boys do this, girls do that. And we know that's not always true in the process, but we can see that girls still climb trees, and in fact we make them more masculine and calling them tomboys, and boys who do girls things, we try to explain the issues of what boys do and whether they nurture or care. So we put people into these to try to understand better. Now remember that theory is that. It's not a proof. If we're in geometry, we have theories and we have proofs, things that prove every time. But it's just like that picture that we will go forward, that if we put 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen together, we get water. When we put John and Paul together, we don't always get the same thing, do we? It allows us to formalize our thinking. It allows us to see how we interpret the world, but we know that there are always things that don't fit to the theory. And that's what you're to examine in this chapter, what the theories are and which ones work for you and how they move forward. So why learn sociology theory of gender? Theory helps us to develop research so that we can test it. It gives us the strengths and weaknesses of the theory to help us test our understanding of gender, and it can confirm our biases, right? It enables us to have that deeper understanding of what's going on as we tie theory to research. And remember, all throughout sociology, throughout this text, what you're presented here is what has been gathered through doing research. Research is very important for us to move forward. And even though our individual experiences may not fit what the research says, we will know that it is the higher percentage that may face that. My gender experience is very different than yours. Obviously, there's that age difference that comes into place, but it's also faced by those multiple other pieces that come forward, such as social economic standing, race, education, all of the other social pieces that come forward. So why gender was not considered in early sociology? Well, think about it. Sociology, like many other disciplines, was developed by mainly white, upper-class, heterosexual European men, and it focused on problems such as industrialization, urbanization, and capitalism. So it looked at that, and they were experiencing life through privilege. Durkheim, fairly well off, a lecturer within the process studying suicide to try to understand that, basically looked at suicide and looked at men's that were affected. As he starts building the strong research, when we look at the writings of Karl Marx and Engels as they wrote together, they did little to look at the situation of women. However, I will say that Engels, when he was writing, said the worst place for a woman to be was in marriage because of her subordinate position, and that her husband owned all her property as well as all her income she did. You know, they assumed everyone shared the same experiences. Did you share the same experiences as everyone else in this class? I often in my class, especially in social problems, say, okay, we all went to high school. We all went to a high school and we had this experience of groups and cliques and all of those things. But if you're in a high school, as a friend of my stepdaughter is, of 17 people in the class, do you have the chance to have the cliques and the divisions? Or even more so, when I say to my class, when I was in high school, we had a swimming pool and a planetarium and 3 gyms available to us. We had swimming as part of our physical education curriculum. It was required in that process. Did you have all that? Did you have the availability to those resources? Or did you have a high school that barely could make it by, that had walls that were crumbling at points, or moved to a larger school and not in your neighborhood? All of those things make a difference, don't they? So privilege really is pretty strong when we start to look at these early theories. So there was a wave of feminism, and part of your process this week will be to look at the wave of feminism, and you will continue it next week through an excellent movie series from PBS that looks at the suffrage movement, and then the women's movement of the 1960s and the current wave out there, as what is considered the current wave of feminism, the focus on race and sexual orientation. As you can see, rights changed within that process. So by 1920, women gained the right to vote. So someone like my mother has had the right to vote her whole life. Think about how different that was back in the past and how it makes a difference. The women's movement of the 1960s worked on passing gender discrimination legislation and focused on women's rights in the workplace. In the early 1960s, a woman could be doing exactly the same job as a man and be paid significantly less for doing it because she was a woman. And that was the only reason why. And it was legal. And there were significant changes that occurred within the laws, yet we still have those issues today, because any of you who have taken any sociology in the past clearly know that women earn about 76 cents on a dollar to men, and that's hour for hour. And part of that is the difference of the type of jobs they do, and part of that is related to paying them at a lower level, even though it is not legal to do. And so we have things like the Lilly Ledbetter law. Liberal feminism is a master framework of equal rights. And what it says is that inequality between men and women is the root of institutional differences. Women's opportunities are different than men and are limited. And even when they're equal, there are significant differences that we can look at and will look at through the course. So when women and men are hired equally, men are more likely to get promoted, and we see that barrier. Now, remember when we went over the syllabus, we talked about removing barriers? Title IX came into place to remove barriers for competition, especially in colleges related to sports, and to make things more equal. We still fight that battle based on those issues. Now, Title IX does much more than that, as we'll look at it later on. Radical feminism is the belief that men and women are fundamentally different, and gender is a tool for power and resources. Now look at the difference between these two theories as you start reading this to understand it at a deeper level. Some men were always involved in the women's movement, and men are feminists as well as women. Very strongly so. You will find that many of the men on the campus that you know, Dr. Ginyard, for one, I can list, is definitely a feminist. He looks at that position of men should be equal to women, and that he can see that theory coming into place. But not all men are privileged by gender. And that's pretty significant as we start looking at this. And that the society is more gender equal is good for everyone. That as we see equality, it helps both. Now think about this in the form of family, and I do this in family class. If both members have equal ability to choose to stay home and raise their children, that's fairness, isn't it? So the best can do it within that process, or both can work out in the field and share the responsibility that's at home, so one person is not more burdened than the other. That this equality is good as we move forward. So, gender from the sociological imagination. Throughout this course, I've asked you to use this thought process by C. Wright Mills and how we've looked at it to analyze the link between social forces, the individual experiences, my experiences as a wife and a mother, and in the process of marriage, versus what are the public issues. You know, and you have to bring yourself out of that focus of your individual's place and look at those public issues, why the law needs to change, or what the public issues are. And maybe you've got good shared tasks at home, but we know that women do about 40 hours of housework at home, where men only do about 18. So it gives us that ability to say, in my home it's equal, but what's the reality out there? And this is why research is so important as you explore this. Gender theory questions. How does theory define gender? How does theory locate the gender? We look at individuals, we look at interactional, we look at institutionals as we start moving forward. So sociology, theories of gender. Individual, we look at sex roles. Interactional, we look at status and character, we look at doing gender, we looked at gender organizations, we look at institutional, we look at the social networks and the homophilia, and then we look at the integrated, the intersectional, and we look at the hegemonic masculinity. So these are the theories you're going to explore this week, and I'll leave you that chance to really explore those. And again, use the PowerPoints as a good outline of where your chapter is going. So let me stop with the videos, not the video, but stop the PowerPoints and leave that for your exploration. Let's see what you're going to do for the module this week. As clearly stated, you need to read the text in detail. I'm asking you to go out and explore the PBS site on Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In the past, I was able to show the PBS video here, but we don't have access to that with the change in the library films. However, what's really nice is the Maker.com documentary on women who make America is available. So you'll get the first view of that documentary. So I'm glad, in a way, that the other wasn't available. Instead of starting this next week, I'll start it now, and you will be able to see all 3 sections. Then a quick YouTube clip for your review. Your discussion board is, of course, available. Do not forget your initial post needs to be done by Wednesday at 11:30 at night, and you will be talking about what theories make the most sense to you and why in relationship to the context of this class, especially what you've seen within the book. So as you start weighing that, and finally, if you choose to do your exercises for your 10 weekly assignments, you can choose from either exercise 3 at the end of the chapter or exercise 6. Exercise 3, let me get to that page. Is interview several friends, co-workers, or family members about their views on gender. And exercise 6 is interview a group of friends, co-workers, or families about their views about feminism. More directions are in your text. So either way, you are to be interviewing people and starting to collect data and to see how people are different. I would recommend you not use family. However, sometimes it is important to see how people of different ages have learned gender and what it means and to them as you go forward. Thank you, and I hope you have a great week. Looking forward to your discussion boards.